All right, so I'm here with Sharon Salzberg, a world-renowned meditation teacher who's been instrumental in bringing meditation to the West, especially loving kindness practice. She co-founded the Insight Meditation Society with Joseph Goldstein and Jack Kornfield, and has written classic books like Loving Kindness and her New York Times bestseller, Real Happiness. Her new book, Finding Your Way, is out now, which is mostly what we'll be talking about today. So, hi Sharon, thanks for coming on and talking with me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
So finding your way it's an amazing collection of thoughts, ideas, and practices for being more calm, more peaceful, more happy, more loving. I love books like this they're so concise and dense, where I can take one short quote or passage or practice and really chew on it for a while. I really like this style for things like philosophy and spirituality because some of the ideas can in such short passages can be so powerful and I like having something short like that instead of kind of getting like waterboarded with too much information to the point where like I never really dig deep into any of the ideas. So just out of curiosity, what made you want to write this book and how did you go about putting it together?
Well, I think the idea really was, as you say, to, in a way, try to create a book where you can open it to any page. Because there's not like one continuous through line, but it's a variety of fairly short essays or passages on a whole variety of different topics. And what happened was really in February of 2020, I spent the whole month pretty much traveling around California and teaching. I got back to the East Coast in early March, and I taught weekend retreat. And then, this is New York, and things were getting more and more tense, and people's parents, largely in those days, that I knew were getting sick from COVID, and there was so little known about it, and anxiety was like through the roof. And I taught a class in the morning in a completely airless room, and somebody, an editor, had asked to meet me for lunch, and so we met for lunch in the cafe of that same building, and she proposed this kind of book to me. She said it could be illustrated, lots of short passages about a variety of different topics. And I said, I don't think so. And she said, no, you should really think about it. Like Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen teacher, he's written two. Pema Chodron is a teacher in the Tibetan Buddhist lineage. She's written one. You should really think about it. And the whole time I was thinking, I don't think so. That's not really my thing. But it was actually during that lunch that I decided, you know what? I'm in New York City. It's so intense here. It's so difficult here. I have a retreat center and a house in Massachusetts in this town called Barre. And I thought, I'll just go up to Barre for 2 weeks and I'll ride out this illness. Then it'll be all gone in 2 weeks. So like 6 months later, I woke up. I was still here. And I remembered that conversation. And I thought, maybe she was right. It's like, attention spans of people are not really flourishing right now, and
Sure.
and we could use something like that just to open it up to any page and see if it's of help. And so I called her and I said, are you still interested? And she said yes. So that was actually the beginning of this book.
How'd you pick what parts you wanted to put into it?
Well, it's always like in writing, this is my 13th book, and it really depends on what's impactful for me. Like I wrote a book years ago called Faith, and somebody really wise said to me, a lot of people think you write a book like that on a topic like that because you know all about it and you want to impart your expertise, but more likely you're trying to learn about it.
Yeah.
And so the writing is part of the learning process. It's part of the exploration. It was totally true. So it was kind of like that for me. I thought, okay, what's cooking for me right now? One of the things I asked myself very seriously in that context, being in Massachusetts, center was closed down like everything was, not knowing, what the future would hold and expectations shattered. I kept asking myself, well, what's still true? And the word in Sanskrit, dharma, which is usually translated as the Buddhist teaching or the truth of things or the way, the laws of nature, something like that, actually has another meaning, which is that which supports us, that which sustains us. That's like, what am I relying on? What am I counting on right now? So, what are the things that I consider in this radically changed circumstance still true and still supporting me? And that's really how I chose the passages.
So it's just the things that really resonated with you at the time. Just kind
Yeah.
of going through things and like putting together what struck.
Yeah.
So that's especially interesting with the COVID circumstance because you open the book with the idea of doing the good that's right in front of you. So was that COVID related where there's a lot of there, and it's generally true that spans across any kind of conditions, but in COVID especially there was a lot of anxiety with people. There's this whole thing going on across the world, across the United States, and nobody really knew what to do about it. There's all these things shutting down. People are getting sick, and it can get pretty overwhelming to try and worry about like what is that like what are we supposed to do about this? We're all kind of locked up in home. Is that kind of like where your head was at in putting that and opening the book with that?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's quite accurate, actually. And it is a truism I try to live by anyway, like
Yeah.
in times of, feeling helpless, times when I feel outraged, whatever it is, I think, okay, what can I do to channel this energy instead of just sitting here, swimming in it? And
Yeah.
even if it's something small, even if it's like thanking somebody or reaching out to somebody who, in fact, that last morning that I taught in New York, it was a situation where the speaker would sit in the front row amongst the audience until they were introduced, and then they'd get up on the stage and they would do their presentation. So still sitting in the audience, and anxiety really was through the roof. And the woman sitting next to me was like super anxious, and I don't know if I should have come, maybe I shouldn't have come, what am I going to do, it's so terrible. And I said, well, there are these breathing exercises, and there are lots of ways of describing them, but basically the theory is that if your out breath is longer than your in breath, the parasympathetic nervous system will start taking over for your sympathetic nervous system, and you'll kind of chill. Your blood pressure is likely to go down, and you'll get more relaxed. So she wasn't interested in that at all. So I said, well, there's a meditation practice called loving kindness where you practice offering or giving good wishes to yourself and to others, and it really affirms a sense of connection. She wasn't interested in that either. So then I said to her, is there anyone you can help? And she lit up. And she said, oh, I have this elderly neighbor, and I could slip a note under her door and maybe ask her if I could do some grocery shopping for her. And then she was like all beaming and happy. And I thought, look at that, That was very interesting because sometimes, of course, those other things are useful and proved useful to many people in that circumstance. But sometimes, the most profound thing we can do is see if we can help somebody else.
Yeah, so that's another interesting part from the book that I think I hadn't heard before was that you mentioned that that traditionally the spiritual path starts off with generosity instead of meditation, which I thought was fascinating. And that's kind of that's an example of it right there, is that focusing on helping somebody else out instead of like focusing on yourself in some ways is a better place to start off. Why is that?
Well, this is, within the context of the Buddhist teaching. They say that whenever he was teaching lay people, not monastics, not monks or nuns, he'd always start with talking about generosity as the first thing, partly because, as he put it, everybody has something to give.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be some mammoth object, or riches. It could be thanking somebody. It could be your attention to somebody you normally might overlook. It could be just being present in some way, or it could be something material, even if not grandiose, Everybody has something to give, and the act of giving affirms something within us around self-respect and a kind of dignity, and that's considered a better place to enter meditation from. Instead of feeling like I've got nothing going and I'm so terrible and whatever it is. And it generally, that sense of a graduated path moves on from generosity to morality, which doesn't mean being uptight, and
Yeah.
moralistic, but having an ethical sense in your life, and maybe, being a little simpler about things, because life can get very complicated, and um, being more straightforward instead of deceptive, or trying to hold up a persona, maybe not having so many secrets, for example. Because what happens is that, we sit down to meditate and everything comes with us.
Hmm.
So if you're engaged in, like, say, a big deception, it's going to at some point pop up in your meditation. You're going to be kind of haunted by it.
Yeah.
Or, if you've acted in some way that's really harmful, even if no one else knows, you know. And so it's sort of like, it's an invitation to clear the decks. It's not the only way to meditate. I mean, you can be a mess, start from there, but you don't have to. You don't have to make things harder for yourself, in other words. And it's like, for once in our lives, maybe we could do something the easiest way possible instead of the hardest way possible. And so that's what the graduated path is really about.
Yes. So is that point of generosity, of what can I do to help somebody else out? Is that your, I guess, your starting heuristic, I guess, for doing the good that's right in front of you? Because it's so
Yeah.
easy to lose that concept, because the things that can be beneficial, they're often so small and deceptively small, to the point where you're like, you think that you're not even doing anything. So it's easy to think too many steps ahead and put the cart in front of the horse. And it's very difficult for me to like put my focus back down on these little steps that are right in front of me. Is that a way that you found has been beneficial to do that?
Yeah, I think it's been extremely beneficial for me to do that, because the problems we face, either in a family or in a society or in the world, can seem really just overwhelming. Like, systems can be seemingly intractable, and change takes time, and
Hmm.
it's frustrating, and it's so painful. And yet, that one thing, it just channels some of that energy, and even if it's in another context, than the original problem, it just helps us so much to affirm connection, and that sense of kind of inner wholeness, like in that moment. The moment you're giving something to somebody, or offering your time or something like that, that moment returns you to some place inside yourself that's not feeling so broken, or so overcome. In that moment, you return to something else.
Yeah. For meditation, I guess, just to start super basic, in your eyes, what is the purpose of meditation?
Well, there are different styles of meditation, like the style well, I teach different styles, but a style that's very popular, getting more well known, is mindfulness practice. And so
Hmm.
the purpose of mindfulness practice would actually, it would begin with some greater concentration, and that's based on the belief that no matter who we are, even if we're very concentrated in some areas of our life, there are other areas where we're sort of distracted or scattered, and the overall effect in our lives is to feeling kind of fragmented, like sort of all over the place. And so, let's say you sit down to think something through. You don't even have to be meditating. You're just trying to work out something in your head. It's not long, usually, before we're just gone. And so they say our minds jump to the past, and often to some situation where we now have some regret. But we're not thinking about that with an eye to how to make amends or for lessons learned. We're just going over it and over it and over it and over it. And I'd say especially in our time, it's an and. Our minds jump to the future, and we create a scenario that has not happened, that may never happen. And we're just lost to that. Like, when I was going back to my apartment after about 8 months in Massachusetts, my apartment in New York, and I could watch my mind, and I will put the emphasis on watch, because sometimes people say, you've been meditating all this time and your mind still does that. Yeah, but I'm not enveloped in it anymore,
Right.
so I'll just say that. But I could watch my mind think, I don't know, I'm going to go back to New York, I'm going to turn on the faucet in the sink. And I read somewhere that if you turn on the faucet, it hasn't been turned on in all this time, then you can get Legionnaire's disease. What are the symptoms of Legionnaire's disease? I wonder if I already have it. And our minds just do that, and we feel so much anxiety and distress over what is not yet actually happening. And so that's a huge amount of our own energy, our life force that we're just wasting. And so what we do
Yeah.
in the practice of concentration is we gather. We gather all that attention together, all that energy together. We learn how to center, we learn how to settle. Um, and that's like a foundation of most meditation practices. And then on top of that kind of gathering or that greater concentration in mindfulness practice, we learn to pay attention in a different way to the many things that come and go. So in developing concentration, we often choose something like, say, the feeling of the breath, the actual sensations of the in and out breath. And that's what we settle our attention on, and our minds go all over the place or we fall asleep. We realize that, we let go, we come back to the breath, we come back to the breath over and over again. But over time, what happens is that instead of so quickly coming back to the breath, maybe an emotion arises, and we learn to stay with that emotion in a different way. Not buying into it, not cascading, also not pushing it away, but being present with it and taking a look at it. And that's what mindfulness would be. So you're not only with the breath, you're with everything as it comes and goes and becomes predominant. And that's why mindfulness is considered the basis for insight, for understanding ourselves in a whole different way. So that's a boon in life, to know what we're feeling when we're feeling it, not like after we've sent the email or whatever. And
Right.
also to understand the nature of those feelings and what we want to cultivate and what we want to let go of, what's just old stuff and we don't need anymore. And, we get all kinds of insights as we do it.
Yeah, you talk about leaving space for emotions and letting them in, and then from that place you can figure out what you want to keep and what you want to let go of. It's to me it's very difficult to discern, and over time it's become more and more evident that emotions that I was labeling as bad and just get rid of those, like they can actually be pretty helpful. Like anxiety is one of them that can kind of like push me when I'm stalling to do something that I know I should be doing, but I'm not. And like you get this kind of like this signal and this pull. And before I was like, oh, anxiety, I don't want to be anxious. But you start to like over time learn that some of these things can be beneficial. How do you go about figuring out what to hold on to and what to let go of?
Well, I think there are different stages to that, process. The first stage might be, or an early stage might be, well, first of all, we pivot. It's like when we have a strong emotion, we are not in the habit of paying attention to that emotion. We're in the habit of paying attention to the object or the story. So let's say you really, really, really want a new car. So what you're tending to think about is, do I want that way of playing music or that other way of playing music? Do I want that upholstery or that other kind of upholstery? It's not that common to kind of turn your attention around as though to say, what does it feel like to want something so badly? Right? And so
Yeah.
sometimes that's what we do. It's not, what am I angry at? And what am I going to do about it? And I need a new therapist or whatever. It's like, what is anger? Like, what does it feel like in my body? And what's the sort of mood of it? As I watch it play out, not trying to block it and also not just diving in like, yes, I'm going to, write a letter. I'm going to, destroy them, whatever. It's like, what is anger? What's the feeling? Because these feelings also tend to be complex. There are layers and shadings. And, we might look at that desire and find a lot of loneliness in there. We might look at that anger and find fear in there, find sadness in there. And almost always, I think, with anger, we will find a sense of helplessness in there. And for me, I know when I can reach that, which I do just through observation, then that's the moment where I think, okay, now what am I going to do? What small action, even small action, am I going to take to channel that? And that's like an effective use, as you say, of the anger. So the pivot is important and the interest is important. So maybe my favorite story about describing mindfulness um, came from an article I read in the New York Times years and years ago about one of the very early pilot programs bringing mindfulness into the schools. So this was a fourth grade classroom in Oakland, California, and they asked one of the kids, so he's in fourth grade, he's like 9 or 10 years old. They said, "What is mindfulness? What is mindfulness?" And he said, "Mindfulness means not hitting someone in the mouth. That's what mindfulness means." And I thought, that's a great definition of mindfulness, because what does it imply? It implies you know you're feeling angry when you're starting to feel angry, not after it's escalated and you've lashed out at somebody. And then it also implies a certain balanced relationship to the anger. Because if we get overcome by it, overwhelmed by it, we'll likely hit a lot of people in the mouth, because life can be really frustrating. But on the other hand, if we hate what we're feeling and we're ashamed of it and we want to push it away, we get tighter and tighter and tighter till we explode. So we sometimes say mindfulness is like the place in the middle. It's like connecting fully to what's going on, neither being sucked into it nor pushing it away. And then understanding can grow. And also, space happens. There's just a sense of spaciousness. And in that spaciousness, maybe options we didn't see before for taking action can arise. Or creativity can arise. Like, I like to think of that kid who was 9 or 10 years old thinking, hit someone in the mouth last week. Didn't work out that well. Let me try this, you know? And that's sort of how it works. You don't have to feel bad about anything you're experiencing, but we're trying to experience it in a different way.
To dig more deeply into what it actually is, instead of like you said, the object of it, or the label that you put on it, or the story that you have attached to it.
Yeah, exactly. Because the stories are fast,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and they can be intricate and compelling. But another story I tell a lot in describing meditation has to do with this quality in Pali, the language of the original Buddhist text. They call it papancha. And I like it because I think it's like one of those words that sounds like what it means. Papancha sounds like popcorn. It means proliferation. As I heard one translator once describe it as the imperialistic tendency of mind. Like something happens and the whole world is taken over. So I was teaching once with my friend, my colleague, Joseph Goldstein, somewhere. And Joseph and I were just sitting in the kitchen of his place having a cup of tea. And someone came into the kitchen in some distress and said to Joseph, "I just had this really terrible experience." And Joseph said, "Well, what happened?" And he said, "Well, I felt all this tension in my jaw, and I realized what an incredibly uptight person I am, and how I always have been and I always will be." Joseph said, "You mean you felt a lot of tension in your jaw?" And he said, "Yes, and I've never been able to get close to people. It's never going to change." Joseph said, "You mean you felt a lot of tension in your jaw?" It was really interesting for me, like watching them go back and forth and back and forth. And finally, Joseph just said something like, "Why are you adding a miserable self-image to a painful experience? It's like painful enough to have all that tension in your jaw, but now you're going to be alone for the rest of your life."
Right.
You know, our minds just proliferate. And so it is painful enough or difficult enough to face a lot of the things we might face in our bodies and our minds. But on top of that, you know, we have all this projection, and we don't need that. You know, so it's not like the story making or the narrative making capacity of our minds is bad, you know, but so often it's really just an old habitual narrative that's not, it's not even accurate, and it's not serving us in any way. You know, it's just repeating.
Yeah.
And so if we can distinguish that from the actual experience, then we can maybe deal with the pain in our jaw and not be burdened by this, you know, terror of being alone for the rest of our lives as well.
Yeah, because that goes back to what you mentioned earlier in the fragmentation of energy and attention, and that, like, if you have all these different stories and ideas popping out of it, like, you don't even know where to start. You're just going to be all over the place, but you could actually just focus on the thing that's actually happening, and that's a much better way to, and
Yeah.
back to the idea of do the good that's in front of you. That's a much better way to like take care of like the simple thing that's actually happening instead of worrying about all these things that don't exist yet.
Yeah. That's true. Very true.
I was interested in the quote that you had in there that attention is the doorway to compassion. What do you mean by that?
Well, there are lots of ways also of seeing that. There's a part of loving kindness meditation where we're actually silently repeating phrases like, may you be happy, may you be peaceful, or whatever phrases we may have chosen. And it's the feeling tone is offering or gift giving. It's like handing someone a birthday card and saying, may you have a great year. And classically, we make that offering to a variety of categories of beings, that we're in different relationships to. Ourselves, someone who's helped us, someone we admire, a friend. And then this category I find really fascinating called a neutral person. It's someone we don't especially like or dislike. So it's somebody usually who plays a certain role in our lives, the kind of person, we might see now and then when we do that errand or whatever it is where we run into them. But we tend to look through them instead of at them. We tend to objectify them. They're like a role. They're not a person
Right.
to us. And so what we do in offering loving kindness to that person, in effect, is look at them instead of through them. We may not know their name. We don't know anything about them, their story. But we are paying attention to them in a different way. And what happens is a certain sense of connection. Not like this person is necessarily going to be your best friend and you're going to spend all this time with them and take them home or whatever. But there's some feeling, there's some sensibility, like seeing, that kind of gulf of self and other and us and them. It's a construct. And there's also a kind of we, that this is a person. And, again, from the Buddhist teaching where he said, like, everybody wants to be happy, not happy in a superficial way, but everybody wants a sense of belonging, a sense of being at home somewhere in his body, in his mind, with one another on this planet. And it's because of the force of ignorance. It's like all the confusion we have, the myths and the distortions that have been fed to us. And we hardly know where happiness is to be found. And so, we can find one another in this sense of connection to one another in recognizing, we all do want to be happy. And, we struggle with this, just not knowing where to actually find it.
Yeah, yeah. You had that quote in the book. That the key to our deepest happiness lies in changing our vision of where to find it.
Yeah.
What shift in perspective are you pointing out there?
I think it could be many. So, for example, when I think about the predominant conditionings I had, or that I find in a lot of people who come to meditation practice, everything from if you accumulate enough, you'll be safe. You'll be safe from change. You'll be safe from death, even. So get more and more stuff, and I'll be okay. Or my favorite actually is it's a dog eat dog world because it's a ludicrous saying.
Right.
Although I've had different people say to me, dogs do eat dogs or dogs don't eat dogs, whatever. But it's a dog eat dog world. In other words, and I say that was, a good part of my own conditioning.
Me too.
Don't help anybody else because they're not going to help you. And it doesn't matter who you have to step on to get ahead. The most important thing is to be on top. And I once was teaching like a 6-day seminar co-teaching, and I talked about on opening night, I talked about this phrase, and this young woman took the microphone and she said, I never realized that was the phrase. It's a dog eat dog world. She said, I always thought it was a dog eat dog world, like puppies jumping up and down in meadows, and then the 6 days went by and we're having a closing circle. And again, she got to the microphone and she said, I've decided I'm not going to live in a dog eat dog world. I'm going to live in a doggy dog world, you know. But I mean, that was a big part of my conditioning, or don't let yourself feel, you know, there was another one. There's so many uh, in one's family, in one's culture, whatever that might be. When I talk about gratitude practice, which is, you know, in that book, many people will say that if we were to write down three things at the end of the day that we're grateful for from the day, that would be very healing and important practice. And it's not like some people think it's not like some people don't like gratitude. They say it's like being being satisfied with crumbs, you know, and not really dealing with a problematic situation. But it's not. In fact, research shows that people who practice gratitude feel stronger
Hmm.
and more. They don't feel so empty inside. You know, they feel more capable of seeking change. Not only that, people who practice gratitude also tend to be the people who want to pay it forward. They want to see other people get a break or do well. But anyway, you know, in terms of conditioning, that's difficult for me. I see if I come to the end of the day, I'm so much more conditioned to think about what I can complain about. You know, I didn't show up in the right way, or someone else disappointed me, or in my traveling days, it was always an airline. You know, now there's always some technology thing. And those might be important to look at, but that's not the only thing that happened. You know, so it's important to also give some airtime to what's positive, what's good. And so it doesn't take force or coercion, but it does take intentionality because my mind's just not going to go there right away. And so I just say to myself, what else happened today? Something like that. And then I just open to a bigger picture.
Yeah, a few of those with conditioning that you mentioned, those hit home a lot with me. You know, I played sports growing up. You come from a highly competitive background, so you know you get a lot of the dog eats dog stuff, and you know the focusing on negative and just this like obsessive improvement all the time, like getting better and better and better and better and better, and like you know gratitude. That's contentment. That's taking away your hunger to get better, and there's just this. You know, it really kind of blew me away over like the past couple of years, learning more about like the ideas of abundance mentalities versus scarcity. I never believed in that because it didn't make any sense to me. I was like, well, how? Like, you know, there has to be a winner and a loser. There's only so many spots on the
Yeah.
team, or like whatever. So those shifts have been really interesting for me over time. I like the leaf metaphor a lot from the book. This idea that like that you know that happiness, that love, that peace is it's kind of already here. It just needs to be uncovered. Is that the way that you look at it generally?
Yeah. I mean, I think it also was born out of my acquaintance with the Buddha's teaching in the sense that he said, everybody, no matter who you are, no matter what you've done, no matter what you've been through, we all have a capacity for change, for growth, for wisdom, for love, for connection. It may be hidden, it may be hard to find, it may be hard to trust, but it's absolutely there. Nothing can actually destroy that potential in us. And that's sort of the basis of how and why we meditate. Because if we're coming from nothing, you know, it would really be a slog and it would be a long, long, hard road. But,
Hmm.
and it still, you know, it takes patience and it takes time, you know, to see the fruit. But nonetheless, we are coming from this capacity. And then we all have it. You know, it doesn't matter who we are. So, um, you know, we opened this retreat center in 1976, and we moved in on Valentine's Day, 1976, and the Insight Meditation Society in 1978 or 79. The Dalai Lama came to visit. He was coming to Amherst, which is about 45 minutes away. And we were like really brash and wrote a letter to the private office and said, "Oh, why doesn't he come visit us too?" You know? And then we got a letter back saying, "Yeah, come," which was crazy. You know, it's like security then was nothing like security has been now for him, but still, it was intense for us. The center is on this little country road called Pleasant Street, and we had to blockade Pleasant Street, and we had state troopers patrolling the roof with guns. I mean, it was really outrageous. And he came, and we gave him a tour and gave him lunch, and then he said we had a retreat that was going on. It had started maybe 2 weeks before. He said he wanted to go into the meditation hall and talk to the meditators. So we brought him into the meditation hall, and he gave a talk. And then he asked for questions. So the first question was from this young man who now has been meditating for 2 weeks. And he said, I've decided I can't do it. I can't make progress. I can't change. Maybe it's worked for like 2,500 years. Not going to work for me. I just don't have the ability to do that. And the Dalai Lama was so startled because this was like his first trip to North America. And he just looked at me and said, you're wrong. You're just wrong. And he went on to describe, what they would call Buddha nature as this inner potential that we all have. And it's funny because after the talk, a lot of people came up to me complaining that the Dalai Lama had said that. Like, that's bad pedagogy. You should never tell someone they're wrong. But who really got a lot from it was the young man.
Right.
The one who was actually addressed to. And it was actually a perfect message for him. But that's really kind of that's the underlying philosophical belief of those cultures.
Yeah, it is. It's funny how, the teaching styles can vary very much depending on who you're dealing with. And like to one person, what seems just kind of brutal might, like, the teacher might know more than we think when we're watching him do that. And we're like, oh, like, that's kind of harsh. Like, sometimes if you're talking to the person, depending on who you're talking to, some people just kind of do better with that kind of approach. Like I mentioned, like in playing sports, a lot of myself and a lot of the people that I was around for a long time, like, the gentle approaches just didn't work as much because, like, this is not really the way that we were brought up in sports. So, like, so it is funny seeing how, like, some people just need, like, harsher teachings. They, like, need to get slapped over the head in order to get the message.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have to trust the motivation of the
Right.
coach or the mentor or the teacher. And because I've never been slapped, but, I've had meditation teachers who were really gentle and others who were really fierce and intense and demanding, and others, some who were very structured and some who were really kind of free floating, and they were all really important to me at the time that I was studying with them. And they were just very different from one another, but I absolutely trusted the motivation of all of them, even the fierce ones.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that popped in my head when you were mentioning the neutral person is that it seems like it's so difficult to maintain this kind of state of mind that you can get in with meditation throughout the day. And, you sit down, you meditate, you feel good, and you get up, and within like 5 minutes, it's gone. Like, this happens to me all the time. And then you go and, you go outside, you go to wherever you're going, and you see these people that you normally see, and you're kind of jaded because you're seeing people all the time, and you're popped out of the state because now, like, you're checking your phone, you're looking at your to-do list, there's all this different stuff to do, GCal's filled up, whatever it is. And it's why, like, at least for me, like, I can get to this point of just kind of like overlooking people because I'm just popped out of the state, and I'm just like caught up, and I'm just like in a spiral, just thinking. What are some ways that you maintain that state throughout the day and avoid getting sucked in, because it's so easy to lose it?
Well, my basic premise is that we're not going to maintain it, but we're going to learn how to return to it. And if people ask that kind of question, like, how can I stay mindful all day long, at work or at school or whatever, how can I keep the level of concentration I got in that retreat? And I would say it's not going to happen that way, but you're going to learn to come back sooner and sooner. And that mirrors what happens in the meditative process, right? Like, you have an object of awareness, let's say it's the feeling of the breath. Your mind goes a billion miles away. You see that, you learn to let go and come back,
Mm.
and let go and come back. So sometimes we call it a practice of recovery. It's really about resilience. Um, the poetic way of saying it is the healing is in the return, not in never having wandered to begin with. So I realized that that's kind of the rhythm of life. You know, we fall down, we have to get up or let others help us up. We start over or we don't start over, you know, and that's kind of the learning that we can and we should
Yeah.
like begin again, you know, instead of locking ourselves in like the failure box or something. And so that's the most important point probably. And then ways to come back in the middle of the busy day and crazy, you know, responsibilities or chaos. We just build it in. It's a practice. Like, you know, we might have formal meditation practice like sitting or walking or even lying down, but a dedicated period where we are doing that, we are assuming that posture, let's say sitting, for the purpose of deepening qualities of awareness and kindness and so on. We're not sitting down to also figure out our vacation plan. That may come up, but that's not the purpose.
Hmm.
So those are like dedicated periods of practice. Then we have the rest of the day, which I once heard this great Tibetan Lama high up in the Himalayas called it short moments many times.
Mm.
We kind of sprinkle moments of mindfulness or loving kindness in a very ordinary activity, and it brings us back. Like probably the most famous example of that is from Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Vietnamese Zen teacher, who said, "Don't pick up your phone on the first ring. Let it ring 3 times and breathe. Then you pick it up." So I once taught that. I suggested that. I was teaching in this financial firm in New York City, and I looked up and I saw the complete panic in everyone's faces, and I said, "Okay, for you, just let it ring twice. You know, that's enough." Um, it doesn't really matter. It's the signal. Something reminds us, okay, take a breath. Or you can do that internally. Like I have friends who work in, say, the corporate world, and they put in their calendar 1 minute before a big meeting or a phone call or something like that, just to breathe, just to come back to themselves. And the good thing about a practice like the breath is that you don't have to close your eyes. You don't need equipment.
Right.
You don't have to look weird. Nobody even has to know you're doing it. Right? It's very private. It's very personal. Just like, okay, I'm coming back to my body, taking a breath or two, and then I'm responding to what I just heard. Something like that. Or, you know, in, say, a Zoom call with all those little boxes, you know, faces in them. I have a friend who suggested you have to do it silently, of course, loving kindness practice. Like you look at every face and think, may you be happy, or may you be peaceful, may you be peaceful, may you be peaceful. And you just see what happens. You know, nothing that takes like an endless period of time, but just short moments, many times, will really make a difference.
Yeah, I found that anytime that I've been able to actually remember to do that, it's been so beneficial. Like even with school, for example, like before a test or a presentation or something, it's yeah, the more I can remember to do that, it's so helpful for when I just lose it and you just get wound up, like without even realizing you're completely derailed. Could you touch on the importance of, I guess, patience in a spiritual path like this? Like you have the drop by drop metaphor that I think is really helpful. That it's just, you're just putting one drop in the bucket at a time, slowly but surely. One of the things that's challenging about this path is that there's no scoreboard for it, and that's beneficial in many ways because scoreboards are addictive, and it's like very easy to get attached to numbers and measures and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. But it's also difficult to if it's hard if you don't know how to recognize progress and stuff seems so slow. Do you have a way of noticing if you've made progress? Because it's one of those things where it's like you don't notice that you've gotten taller because you're just like, you're barely getting taller all the time until you go over to grandma's house and she has the thing on the wall and she's like, this is how tall you were last year. And you're like, oh, wow, I actually did get taller. Or like looking at how much, older I've gotten in pictures. Like, you don't recognize it because you see you every day, and then you look at a picture from 5 years ago and you're like, oh, I actually do look fairly different. Do you have ways of doing that with this and staying patient?
Yeah, I mean, it is hard, and I think something that makes it even harder is that the progress or the benefits sometimes don't manifest at all really in the place where we look, which is that, let's say, 15 minutes a day where you have a regular dedicated practice. And people often despair. I still get sleepy. I'm still anxious when I sit, or this comes up. I still have lots of thoughts. There's still disgusting thoughts, whatever it is, you know. But in relating to all this differently, which is sort of the point, not that different things happen, but that we relate so differently to them that the experience is different. What changes is our lives, not necessarily that formal period. And so, like I once had a friend take me out to lunch in New York, and he said, "This is like a confessional lunch." I said, "Okay." And he said his particular practice was loving kindness, but this works across the board. He said, "I've been doing loving kindness practice for 3 years now, whether I'm on retreat or I'm just sitting at home." And he said, "My experience sitting is not all that different now, 3 years later, than it was when I started." He said, "But I'm like a completely different person. I'm different with myself. When I make a mistake, I'm different with my family. I'm different ethically. I'm different with my community." And he looked at me and said, "Is that enough?" And I said, "Yeah, I kind of think it's enough. But it's hard to measure. It's hard to even notice sometimes. Like you say, it's incremental, but it's definite, it's real, and it's incredibly freeing. And we don't tend to look there. We look at that 15-minute period a day, and it's like, oh no, I'm still sleepy.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot to develop that patience. And sometimes the best thing is really having some sense of community, like so that there's some shared experience and people can share their frustrations and their amusements and all the different things that come along the way.
Yeah, this last point that I wanted to touch on that I thought was very encouraging. This idea that these buckets don't leak. This idea that, like, you don't really go backwards even when you feel like it. And I certainly have times all the time when I feel like I've gone backwards, where I'm more calm at this time, more peaceful at this time, treated people better at this time, took care of myself better at this time. Um, and I tend to view these as regressions because that's what it feels like. What is your way of looking at these?
Um, when I was young, we had a toy called a Slinky. I don't know if they exist.
Yeah.
Maybe they've come back the way vinyl has come back. Uh, and it's like this loop. It's coil. It's like
Hmm.
a coil. You can go up and down stairs and stuff like that. But I have sometimes thought of the Slinky as the model for the path. It's like we're going round and round and round, but actually at the same time there's a forward movement that is definitely happening. But we're so caught up, and I'm up, I'm down around the particular loop that we're not necessarily sensing the forward movement. And the actual image from the bucket, came from the Buddha, which was something like a mind, which means a life, will get filled with qualities like mindfulness or loving kindness moment by moment, the way a bucket will get filled with water drop by drop. And I just love that image
Hmm.
right from the first time I heard it, because right away I could see myself standing by that bucket and looking in and fantasizing. I was living in India and thinking, someday I'll go back to New York and I'll be fully enlightened and bucket will be all filled and I'll be floating down the streets wearing my white sari. Or more commonly, I'd look in the bucket and think, that bucket's really empty. It's
Yeah.
never going to be filled. And in both cases, not taking the time or having the patience to add the next drop and the next drop and the next drop. And once I started using that image in teaching, people did start coming up to me and saying, "I think my bucket has a leak." To which I'd respond, these buckets don't leak. They really
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah, I love this message of just what one step at a time that you hammer home over and over throughout your books and throughout your teachings. So I'll have your website, the book linked, Insight Meditation Society linked. Along with those, is there anything that you'd like to let people know about?
That's basically it. My website is chock full of information,
Cool. Yeah.
and possibilities.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the work that you do. It's been enormously beneficial for myself and a lot of other people as well. So thank you so much. I really
Yeah,
appreciate it.
thank you. Thank you very much.